A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 17th edition of the Together for Education webinar brought to you by Notebook. When this coronavirus pandemic started, schools had shut down, and Notebook offered its content for free for all schools and students to use. We soon realized that there were other problems that students and teachers were grappling with, where Notebook could perhaps lend a hand. With that thought process, we set up this Together for Education series of webinars. The initial idea was to address issues that teachers are facing in taking online classes. Over the last few weeks, what has happened has been a phenomenal discovery for us. We have been able to bring together thought leaders from various walks of life to discuss topics that are of relevance not only in the curricular world, but also in the extracurricular world, and look at education more holistically. Every session has been attended by more than 400 participants, and the response has been absolutely encouraging. Today, we touch upon a very important topic, something that we rarely ever understand, and yet is so very important in our overall education system. Today, we look at understanding the education needs for children with special needs. Before we start today, we just want to go back to the genesis of how education for students with special needs came into being. What I'll do now is play you a short Notebook video. We at Notebook create audiovisual content for students to study with. And after that, I will start introducing to you our panelists.
Helen's life took a turn for the better when she met Dr. Graham, who introduced her parents to Mr. Anignos. Through Mr. Anignos, Helen got Miss Anne Mansfield Sullivan as her teacher. Miss Anne Sullivan came to live with Helen on 3rd March, 1887. Helen's world started changing from then on. Let us now find out how Helen learned to read and write, guided by Miss Sullivan. Miss Sullivan taught Helen the names of the objects by giving them to her and then spelling out the letters of the objects in her hand. Helen learned to spell these words through imitation. She learned to connect the names of the objects with the physical objects themselves. Helen was never keen on learning arithmetic or sciences. Miss Sullivan taught Helen to read by giving her strips of cardboard with raised letters on them. Nature was one of the main sources from which Helen derived knowledge and understanding. Keller fills her autobiography with metaphors. She compares her state of mind before Miss Sullivan's arrival as a ship caught in a fog. She also uses the biblical metaphor of Aaron's rod to describe how learning new words transformed her.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to the stellar panel we have today. It is our privilege to have such eminent speakers with us. A small request to all the participants. I know you will have a lot of questions and comments. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you could please use that to type in your questions. We have a moderated question and answer session at the end of this webinar, where we will try and guide your questions to the people they were intended for. With that, we move to introduce our first speaker of the day. It is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Philip Burrett. Mr. Burrett retired as the Deputy Headmaster from the illustrious Doon School in Dehradun after 44 years of serving in education across various institutions. Mr. Burrett served the Doon School as Housemaster, Head of Department, Dean of Student Welfare, Dean of Activities, Deputy Headmaster, Second Master, and Acting Headmaster with great distinction. He also carried out a visioning exercise for the Doon School in the year 2011 through an in-depth study of a number of British public schools and various schools in the US. Mr. Burrett qualified as a leadership trainer at the Wellington College in UK in the year 2000. He is also an athlete, an adventurer, and a naturalist. It is indeed our privilege to present Mr. Philip Burrett. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Shubhayu. Am I audible, Shubhayu?
Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and a very good evening to our stellar panel, and to you and Achin and all our guests who've tuned in. Because of the panel and their credentials, I am just going to give you a very broad baseline, looking at learning disabilities from a teacher's point of view. And then I'm going to let the stellar panel take it on. Looking back to this topic from the days when I was in school, we had no clue what it meant to be, learning disabled. Anyone who was not good at his studies was very, very rudely, labeled either slow or thick. And you know how cruel children are. I'm sure they got the sharp end of the stick from not only the normal kids, I mean, if you know what normals are, and also from teachers. And if we had a problem with bad marks or poor grades, we were caned and punished or kept back in class. And the really serious cases, if it was a behavioral problem, were expelled. And I'm sure down the years, so many children who had learning disabilities have actually suffered unnoticed and suffered in silence along the way. I only started to hear about this term, learning disabled, when I was a teacher in the 80s, and where I was trained to recognize signs of learning disabilities and report this to the special education department. And so much has happened over the last 4 decades, where psychology has joined hands with education to help us understand why these children are different, why they have difficulty learning, and what we can do about it. With brain scans and brain mapping, all this in-depth learning of the mind has given us educators an insight into these children's needs and why we need to be sensitive. Now, according to the Disabilities Act of 2016, there is no division between disabilities and special needs. Everything is grouped under disability. Disabilities range from the physical and mental impairments, which render one difficult or differently abled, let's say a cripple or injured person, physically or mentally disabled, impaired, hearing or visually impaired, or incapacitated in some way, to the learning difficulties which include emotional or behavioral issues as well. In short, learning disability is the inability to learn the way regular people do, because the brain is wired differently. Today, most good schools have a team of special educators and testing facilities in-house and put in place individual education programs for each student. Others have teams of special educators, but the testing is done elsewhere, out of school. Most schools will have all teachers trained to some degree to identify children who show signs of learning difficulties as they grow up. And then they hand this over for screening and further work on them. Today, only the top institutions will have well-established setups to handle learning disabilities. But no matter how modernized a school is and how aware they are of this problem, they are all burdened with lack of funds and specialized staff. And so it is incumbent on each parent to get proactive about one's child's special learning disabilities and to see how this could be best handled. Now, another buzzword that we hear very frequently thrown around is inclusive education, which just means that schools should open their doors for children with special needs, visual and hearing impaired, learning disability, so that they can grow up with normal school children. Most schools shy away from this responsibility to take in kids who have a learning disability because they don't want them to be with normal kids. But they fail to see that normal kids will benefit a lot with these children around. Attitudes like kindness and empathy and concern and love all develops in normal children when they have children with special needs around. I remember we had in the school I last worked with a visually impaired child. We also had a do-off, and the boys got along very well, and there was no problem with these children. I know when I was in school, we always had a few boys with polio, and in no way were we any different from them. I know they couldn't play games, but we were sensitive to them and we took them along with us. Now, there is a very strong lobby that is in favor of not segregating regular education from special education, because educationists state that if special needs education is really child-centric, then why should it not be available for all? And I think the real problem is that schools are so focused on getting this 99% marks and so focused on gloating over how many kids got into their this university and that university, that we actually lose sight of the fact that education is not that. What the best schools today should do is to try and figure out why the child is who he is and try to collaborate and decide on a course of action that might help. Now, there's also a school of thought that claims that educators and the medical profession have gone overboard with testing and declaring children to have learning disabilities. And they put these children onto drugs. And, I think the pharma companies are all to blame on this. And in the US, it's very fashionable to talk about one's child having this or that learning disability and what medication he is on or she is on. And I think this practice is most harmful, to say the least. There's also strong evidence to suggest that learning disabilities run in families. And if one or both parents have had a learning disability, there is that stigma attached to this problem even today. And instead of coming out with it, parents would like to sweep it under the carpet and not talk about it. And all they would do is to ask the board examinations to give them an extra time, 15 minutes extra time per hour when it comes to exams. But that's about all parents would like to do. The other thing is that I'd like to say that there are certain myths around learning disabilities. One is that we can't cure a learning disability. We can teach children to cope and handle the problem. And as they grow, adults seem to manage their problems better than children. The other thing is that a lack of success in the classroom does not need to translate into a lack of success in life. And there's so many famous people who have had learning disabilities, ADHD, and who have done very well in life. I looked up a few, and I know Tom Cruise, Adam Levine, Keanu Reeves, to name a few, have had learning disabilities. Now, it is not that these kids are stupid or cannot learn. It is just that they learn differently. And they are very good at certain things, like theater and dance, practical and collaborative work. They're very good at singing and sport. There tends to be a compensatory balance with these children. Then, this is not an intellectual disability. The child must have an IQ of over 85 to be diagnosed with a learning disability. One must rule out other problems like vision or hearing impairment or ADHD or autism before we can diagnose a child with a learning disability. Now, I will leave the whole list of various learning disabilities to our esteemed panel, but as a teacher, words like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dysphasia, ADHD, where 7 million children the world over are affected by this. There's also certain problems dealing with autism, the whole autism spectrum, which is another problem that we face in school. An autistic kid doesn't only need special learning, but he also needs to be given a normal schooling. These children have communication and perception problems. They have problems socializing, and they can't respond emotionally. They can't express themselves. On the other end of the spectrum, as a teacher, you'd also find that you have specially bright and gifted students. And these too suffer in a normal class because they just feel frustrated in a normal class. And you need special interventions. They need more challenge. They need more freedom. They need different homeworks, testing. And many ADHD kids may also be gifted as well. What we as teachers need to understand is that we have to move from the statement, he is lazy, to he cannot help it. We as teachers should go beyond looking at the problem the child is or creates and wonder why the homework is incomplete or untidy, or that the child is not sitting down. If the teachers are not curious to understand the why of the problem, then they get too trigger happy to fix the problem. This one lens, one mold model is harmful. We want all kids to fit into one mold and resent those who are different because they challenge us. The shame of non-acceptance of these children's difference is sometimes more damaging than the diagnosis. There is much that can be done and is being done to handle children with special needs, but that will have to wait for another webinar. Suffice it here to say that a good relationship between a teacher and child with a learning disability is what really creates the change. The mantra that I would like to end with is different rules for different needs is what we need to look at. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Shubhayu. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us. As always, we benefit from having you as our opening batsman and opening and setting the stage for the rest of the discussion to follow. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will now move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Achin Bhattacharya. Achin is the founder and CEO of Notebook. A chartered accountant by training, he was a director at Deloitte prior to starting Notebook. He has worked both in India and abroad in various senior capacities in GE, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. Achin is an avid reader and a passionate traveler with a keen interest in economics, history, literature, and philosophy. He is a regular speaker at various forums and chambers of commerce, and also contributes articles to numerous publications regularly. He is also on the board of some of the most renowned corporates and contributes significantly to brand strategies. Achin, over to you.
Shubha, am I audible?
Yeah, Achin.
Good evening, everyone. Today, I once again welcome all of you to this session on a topic which is very important, but seldom spoken of. Children need help in every possible area, and as they grow up gradually, their degree of self-sufficiency increases each day. But there are some who perhaps need a little more love, care, and attention than their peers. Before going ahead with the discussion, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists who are here with us today to enlighten us further with their thoughts and experiences on this important topic. Now, any parent knows how it feels to send your child first time to school. It's a new world for the child, and naturally a parent will be concerned when her son or daughter first time walks inside the school gate. The concern increases manifold if the child has any special need. And this is when the school and teachers have a very important role to play. Now, the Honorable Supreme Court had, in response to a plea claiming lack of sufficient number of special educators to teach children with special needs, said that we are of the prima facie view that the children with special needs have to be imparted education not only by special teachers, but there have to be special schools for them, the bench said. Now, the Apex Court also clarified that when we say disability, we do not mean disability as has been defined in Right of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. Now, the Right of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 includes certain physical disabilities which may not be a warrant for getting admission in special schools, the bench said. Emphasizing the need for a separate system, the court said, students who suffer from blindness, deafness, and autism or such type of disorders may be required to have separate schools with distinctly trained teachers. Now, in many cases, the integration of special needs students into general learning classroom has had many benefits. A study done by Douglas Martson tested the effects of an integrated learning environment on the academic success of students with special needs. Now, students were gathered from three different categories. First, those in isolated learning environment. Second, those in integrated learning environment. And third, those who were in a combination of both isolated and integrated learning environment. He calculated the average number of words read by each group in fall and again in spring and compared the outcome. The findings showed that those in integrated learning environments or a combination of isolated and integrated environments experienced greater improvement in their reading skills than those in strictly isolated environment. Then again, there are social benefits as well. By surrounding special needs students with their fully functioning peers, they are exposed to diversity. Their close contact with other students will allow them to develop friendships and improve interpersonal skills. Now, when we say the term special needs, it's a broad range, right? So, from people with autism, Asperger's syndrome, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, dyslexia, dyspraxia, blindness, deafness, ADHD, cystic fibrosis. They can also include cleft lips and missing limbs. The type of special needs vary in severity, and a student with a special need is classified as being a severe case when the student's IQ is between 20 and 35. Now, these students typically need assistance in school and have different services provided for them to succeed in a different setting. Now, I believe that there is a global shortage of teachers, particularly of teachers who are sufficiently trained and motivated to include children with disabilities and from other marginalized groups in regular schools. Also, it is important to continuously, professionally train them. Continuous professional development is important. As a civil society, we need to prioritize improving the educational opportunities of marginalized children and communities. They need to grasp the concept of inclusive education as a twin track approach. Now, why twin track? Because which can improve the quality of education for all, yet also provide specialized support where needed for children with disabilities. Also, inputs from diverse stakeholders, in particular community members and professionals with disabilities, to give stronger sense of reality to teachers' learning experiences. Now, coming to teaching strategies for specially able children. Children with learning disabilities show greater learning when techniques like task analysis, peer teaching, cooperative learning, learning corners, and multisensory approach are used. Now, this is a vast topic, and I'm sure the stellar panel that we have today will take it up. Just few very important brief points that I would like to touch upon in terms of strategies, which would be helpful to both parents and teachers when trying to teach the children are: utilize multisensory learning, break information down to smaller units. Very important, utilize peer tutoring and cooperative learning. Using a developmentally appropriate approach, making information as concrete as possible, reading out test material to students. Very important, use of consistent vocabulary when teaching a new skill, and giving students a chance to share and justify their thinking in different ways, and laying greater emphasis on inter-student dialogue and collaboration. Now, another very important aspect is role of parents. Now, parental adjustment may consist of any or all of the following stages. First and most important is awareness of the problem, recognition of the problem, searching for a cause, search for a cure, and acceptance of the child, most important. The parent should bear the following in mind: foster a feeling of self-esteem in your child, not to compare the performance of their child with other siblings. Now, all children have strengths and competencies, and these strengths must be identified and reinforced. Parents who convey hope provide a major force in helping children overcome adversity and become resilient. Parents can help children develop a sense of responsibility and contribution to the family. Parents can provide opportunities for their child to make choices and decisions and promote self-discipline. Thus, they can help the children deal effectively with their mistakes and failures. Shubham, am I audible?
Sorry, Achin, I lost connectivity for a second back there. We'll just resume.
And I think very important that to attend training program along with the community. Now, post this, I would just like to share a few very beautiful success stories, especially in the developing world with regard to specially able children. Now, these are very inspiring stories of children who are pursuing their education despite coping with the challenge. First, very important, is a story from Kenya of Adhiambo, a young Kenyan girl whose story shows the transformative impact of inclusive education. When she was younger, she developed polio, which left her severely physically disabled. Sadly, she was also the victim of sexual violence and resulted in her becoming a parent at a young age. But this all changed when she got to go to school. Now, Adhiambo is in class every day and has made huge progress with the help of her teacher. She dreams of becoming a tailor and opening her own shop. Education has given Adhiambo hope. Next, we have Richard from Equator. High up in the hills of Equator's capital city, Quito, you will find 8-year-old Richard, who lives with his mother and 15-year-old brother, Armando. He has a genetic disorder, also known as brittle bone disease. It means he cannot enjoy a typical childhood. He says, I cannot run or jump or play on the swings. But he really enjoys going to school, where he is top of his class. Education has meant that Richard's dreams are not limited by his disability. He dreams of taking to the skies one day so that he can see the world. Now from Equator, we come to the hills of Nepal. Here is Amir. Amir is an artist, a 16-year-old from Palung, a remote and ancient market town in southern Nepal. Amir was born without the use of his arms or legs, and so he's adapted to use his mouth to paint pictures and write powerful poems. A foundation sponsored him to move to Kathmandu after the devastating earthquakes in Nepal, where he has established himself as a Nepalese icon. Amir was homeschooled in Palung, visited by a teacher every day. Amir is slowly challenging the false beliefs regarding the potential and capability of children and adults with disabilities by becoming a role model to others. He says, my teacher tells me to paint what's in my mind and in my dreams. Now, from Nepal, we come to Matha of Cambodia. Matha is a 14-year-old, and after being born with an oversized skull, she became paralyzed as she got older. But a UK-based charity paid for Matha to have a tutor at home. Matha went to school to sit exams with other children. She came fourth highest out of 42 pupils. Her mother is fully supportive of her determination to complete her education. And the most touching part of it, she says, since last year, I haven't needed to push Matha to school in her wheelchair because her schoolmates now help every day. And last, we have John from Kenya. John is a 13-year-old from Nakuru in Western Kenya. He is in class 8 at Bridge International Academics, where he is working hard to prepare for the primary living exams. Success in this exam means he will be able to graduate to a secondary school, hopefully of his choice. Now, John is the son of his semi-literate parents, a housewife and a daily laborer. He says, my favorite subject is science. He loves to learn how things work when he finishes school. He wants to attend the University of Nairobi to become an engineer. Now, these are just 5 of the incredible stories of people with disabilities who are learning against the odds around the world. I'm sure there are millions more. Thus, to be honest, one can truly one can truly tell of the beauty of having a special needs kid. No one can tell this except their families, friends, or teachers, or people who deal with them on a daily basis. After speaking to various people, there are some of the common characteristics that I would like to mention. They can indeed tell the difference between a good person and a bad one. Very instinctive, right? They also bring out the child inside you. When you play with a little kid, you feel like you had a child inside of you. So think about it in this way. When you are with a child with special needs, they bring out that child within you, no matter how old they or you are. Now, they also have protective instincts. They can take care of you as much as you can take care of them. And they're very gifted. You'll find that most special needs kids are talented in different fields and very affectionate. They're very kind and loving personalities. They don't hold grudges in their hearts, they just let go. And incredible good manners. Most specially able kids I have seen are very polite and very respectful. So, and also another thing which is very important is children with special needs tend to appreciate the little things in life. The way they think and act is very simple and pure. So much so that you can actually get jealous of them. They have their own pretty simple life with butterflies flying around them. And no doubt about it, they are very honest. Kids with special needs simply never lie. Very organized, most of them very tidy and always organized. And another thing very important is, I think very touching, they give the best and warmest hugs in the world. So, with dreams of a more inclusive world where there will be a smile on every child's face and equal opportunities for all, I will now vacate the stage for our esteemed panelists who would guide us with their thoughts and experiences on the challenges and the way forward in this very important topic. I sincerely thank all of you for giving me a patient hearing. Over to you, Shubhayu.
Thank you, Achin. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. It is now time to introduce to you our panel of the day. You have heard from Mr. Burrett and Achin on perhaps what could be an outsider's take into the world of children with special needs. We will now hear from people who have devoted their lives to taking care of these children, and somebody who has experienced this firsthand, perhaps is experiencing this firsthand every day of his life. It is now my privilege to introduce to you our first panelist, Joy Bhattacharya. Joy is the CEO of the Professional Volleyball League. After having been the director of the FIFA Under-17 World Cup that happened in India in 2017, and he's the ex-team director for the Kolkata Knight Riders, the IPL team. Joy is a passionate sports fan and a quizzer who blended his love for statistics and sports to create the Seat Cricket Ratings, which was India's first sports rating show. He served as the head of production at ESPN Star Sports and was a senior vice president at National Geographic Channel. He's a regular cricket pundit on CricBuzz Live, a quiz master on Hindu Business Line, and a Twitter celebrity. Today he is here as the father of Neil and Vivek. It is our pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Mr. Joy Bhattacharya.
Hi. Hi, Shubhayu. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to see all the people on this panel. It's great to be here. And I've just, as I said, as the discussion goes onwards, I hope I have something to contribute as a father of Neil, a special needs child. But I'll wait for the rest of the panel and we'll discuss whatever will be discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. We will move on to introduce our second panelist of the day. Just a second, we are facing a little bit of a technical difficulty day. It is now my privilege to introduce to you Ms. Anamika Ghose. Ms. Ghose is the head of the Department of Additional Learning Support and Special Education Needs at the Pathways World School in Gurugram. She was the former school counselor at the Doon school, and along with being the teacher of psychology for the senior classes. Ms. Ghose believes that equipping her team with the latest pedagogy and practice, as well as encouraging technology-based teaching, is the future of special education needs at schools. It is our privilege to have Ms. Ghose with us today. Ma'am, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I think I'm really looking forward to talking to each one of you with all our experiences and sharing that. So, yeah, over to you, Shubha.
Thank you, Ms. Ghosh. The third panelist that we have the privilege of introducing to you today is Ms. Priyo Lall. Ms. Lall is the Chief Executive Officer of the Raphael, Ryder, Cheshire International Center in Dehradun. She has been working as a psychology teacher, a career counselor, a play therapist, a professor of psychology, and has been the principal of the same center back in 1994. She has then had a private practice as a counselor in Dehradun, and she again joined this center in the year 2001. She currently is the Chief Executive Officer there. Ms. Lall has been awarded the Dr. B.C. Roy Award for Social Work in 2010, the Rajiv Gandhi Manav Seva Award for Service to Children in 2014, and the Divya Jyoti Jagriti Award for contribution in the field of advocacy for the cause of persons with disabilities in 2018. Ms. Lall, it's our privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you, Subhayu, for inviting me to this. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Our fourth panelist for the day is Dr. Puneet Basur. It's indeed our privilege to have her with us today. Dr. Basur is the principal of the Bajaj Institute of Learning for the Deaf in Dehradun. She holds a postgraduate diploma in guidance and counseling from the Punjab University and a PhD from the HNB Garhwal Central University in the impact of perceived leadership styles and quality of work life on employee engagement in the education sector. She has been the principal of the Bajaj Institute of Learning for Deaf, which is one of the best deaf institutes of the country, thereby passionately involved in empowering the deaf people through education and vocational training. She is constantly striving for innovative techniques for inclusion of the deaf with the mainstream. She has successfully introduced vocational courses for them, and she plans to do a research on psychological behavior of her students. She is an avid reader and a keen sportsman who enjoys cycling and being outdoors. Dr. Basur, it's our privilege to have you with us today. Dr. Basur, your mic's on mute. If you could please unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. Thank you for introducing me.
Thank you so much for being here today, ma'am. I will now step back. I will ask Ms. Lall to start with some opening remarks. Your take across this vast experience you've had dealing with especially students with special educational needs, and then we'll go around the table as we go on. Ma'am, over to you.
Oh, thank God. That was a bit of a surprise. Okay. Are we just introducing the topic, or am I actually making the presentation now, Subhayu?
Ma'am, if you have a presentation, please feel free to share your screen. I'll stop my share.
Okay, so since we don't have much time, I just want to say this is such a very important topic that you have selected, education for children with special needs. And I hope that you're going to take this forward, because each of us is going to speak for about 10 minutes. And I think we're just going to barely give you a little window into what a special need means. I mean, I'm going to talk about specific learning difficulties, sometimes called dyslexia incorrectly. I know that Puneet is talking about hearing impairment, and Anamika, I think, is also talking about special education needs. But we really need to empower teachers to be able to include the children in their classroom. This is the most marginalized section of students who need to be part of your schools. And I think really, Mr. Burrett said earlier that there's a lack of special educators. And the unfortunate thing, because I've been working for 30 years, is people don't want to join the field of special education. It's not, I can see Anamika nodding and I think agreeing, because it's not a paying profession. We don't get paid like general school educators do get paid. So, but on this platform, if you can get other people to talk and talk about disability, it's going to be a great platform. So should I just go into my presentation, Subhayu?
Yes, ma'am. If you could please start
I'll
with
just
the
share my screen. Can you give me a second to do that?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, can you see and can you hear?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am, we can.
talking about what we call specific learning difficulties. I just want you to notice that I have taken the word disability away and said difficulty, but we do use disability and difficulty. And I think it's a term that all of you know because I've heard all the previous speakers using about it. I think using the word, I think the most important thing is for all of you or all of us to know how to correctly identify a child with any specific learning difficulty. That is the most important. And at least 10% of all children in any school have a specific learning difficulty. So those of you who are teachers there, just do the maths for your school and it will amaze you how many children in the school must have a learning problem. In order to correctly identify a child with learning difficulty, you do need to rule out these factors first. A child who's having difficulty or copies incorrectly off the blackboard may have a visual impairment. A child who has difficulty with spellings and is mixing up sounds may have a hearing loss. In the name of play schools, children are made to hold pencils and crayons as young as 2.5. The bones of the hand are not formed properly by then, and there might actually be a slight deformity, and that is why a child holds a pencil awkwardly. So rule out physical disability. Does the child struggle in general? Is the child generally behind all children of his or her age? There may be an intellectual disability. A lot of children, especially in Uttarakhand where I come from, are on medication for allergies. Children may be on medication for seizures, and this medication can make them drowsy. That is why they cannot concentrate. Is the child frequently absent from school because of not being well? What are the emotional factors at home? What are the mental health issues? And now, after this pandemic, this is going to increase. But if all these factors have been ruled out, then I think it is fair for you to suspect that the child may have a learning disability, which is defined as an unexpected condition. You do not expect it in that child. It is unexplained because there seems to be no reason for it. Very important, this child is of average or above average intelligence. There is a significant delay. Significant delay here means 1.5 to 2 years behind. So a child of 9 years old who is reading at the age of 7-year-old, that is a significant delay. But the difficulty is in only one or more areas of learning, not generally in all areas. There are many different kinds of specific learning difficulties. There are difficulties associated with academic skills called dyslexia. There are difficulties specifically with maths called dyscalculia, difficulty with writing, dysgraphia, difficulty with coordination, dyspraxia. I'm focusing on dyslexia because that is actually more commonly what we see in schools. What do we know about it? We know that you're born with it. We know it's neurological. We know it's in the brain. We can't uncross the wires in the brain. It is going to be there throughout a person's life. You do not grow out of it. So we as teachers need to give them coping strategies that will help them to read and write and spell. The problem is also if you have more than one such child in your class, no two children are the same. So the teaching becomes difficult for the teacher, understandably. I just want to again re-emphasize the child has got average or above average intelligence and should not be treated as a child who's below average. Why focus so much on identification? Because what we do in schools, if a child is not doing well, say in English, we group them all together with children who are struggling in all subjects. But this child is struggling only in 1 or 2 areas and they need specific teaching strategies. They cannot be grouped with other children. Before I come to this, I'm going to actually share with you some of the flags that we see at the preschool level, the primary school level, the middle school level. A child with learning difficulty must be identified between the ages of 3 and 7. A learning difficulty does not happen suddenly in middle school. Most often we see children, counselors, psychologists see children at the age of 11 or 12, and that is because we have missed them out when they were younger. Now, if you are assessing or suspecting a child at this older age, You need to go back to the checklist for the preschool and the primary school. There has to be a pattern of difficulties. I don't have time to discuss all of them, but I'm very happy to share what I have. So let's look at some of the preschool signs, some of the flags. The child may have been what we call a bottom shuffler, doesn't crawl. The child may have talked late. The child may have difficulty hopping. The child may have difficulty learning nursery rhymes. The child is unable to identify body parts, cannot label colors, has difficulty sequencing. We teach them Monday, Tuesday, A, B, C, D. When you play this game that all preschools play, put your left leg out and your right hand in, the child has difficulty doing that. Now, the problems persist into the primary school level. All children are taught how to write their own name, and this child finds it difficult. The difficulty in sequencing persists. The child has difficulty learning the alphabet. Sometimes ask a 12-year-old who you think has learning difficulty. He will not be able to put the alphabets out in order. The child has difficulty telling you what day comes before what, which day comes after. Very often the child may be left-handed, or there is a confusion between left and right. The handwriting is untidy. The child holds the pencil in a very awkward way and confuses. Now we very often see children confusing B and D and P and Q. This is quite common till the age of about 7. If it continues beyond that, then we think the child probably has a learning difficulty. Very important is that the written work is much poorer than the oral work. The problems persist and continue into the middle school level. Now the child has great difficulty reading, leaves out a line when reading, may read the same line twice, leaves out words, guesses words. The spelling errors are not normal spelling errors. They're quite bizarre, and I'm going to show you some spelling. There's a lot of rubbing out. Even the paper can tear. The handwriting is really untidy. The child cannot learn more than one language, yet this child seems to know much more than he can write and give you. Okay, I'm going to put up something on the screen, and unfortunately I can't see any expressions or any faces, but if I ask you to read that, everybody's going to say, oh my God, how can I do that? Sometimes this is what the words on a page look like to a child with dyslexia. And the teacher says, you stand up and read. And the child freezes. And then other children try to join in and help. And we always say, I didn't ask you, you wait your turn. The child is stuck. What can you do? Give the child a ruler to place under each line. Take a piece of maybe cardboard and cut out a little rectangular shape the size of a word so that the child is only seeing one word at a time. And this starts with, it was a dark day. Spelling. If you can see this, I know it's not very dark, but look at the last column and look at the bottom word. And I don't think you can guess it, but I know that this child has tried to write the word soldiers. Look at that piece of dictation. They get confused with the double vowel sounds. All the letters are there, but in the wrong order. Silent letters are left out, and the child spells the word exactly as it sounds, satisfaction and certainty. When a child has difficulty with reading and spelling, a lot of these children will also have difficulty with maths. They get confused with the symbols, the plus and the multiply, the minus, the divide, the equal. Another reason why they will have difficulty in maths is because maths has a language that we don't teach children. So when you start teaching the child 2 plus 2, you say you have to add, you have to do plus, then you say find the sum of, then you say what's the total, then you say how many do you have altogether, and it goes on like that. So we don't teach them the language of maths. Then we introduce the problem sums. This child is already struggling to read. So he loses track of the problem because he's trying to read. And then the more difficult sums have many steps in them. And this child may have difficulty sequencing. So he doesn't remember what step to do first in the more complex problems. Because I know we have limited time, I'm going a bit quickly. If we have overlooked this child at the preschool level, the primary school level, and now the middle school level, we are going to see a lot of behavioral problems. The child may become a bully. The child may disrupt the class. Ma'am, I need to sharpen my pencil. Can I go and drink water? May not have many friends. May start biting his or her nails. May have a lot of physical ailments. Doesn't want to come to school. I have a headache. I have a stomach ache. The child may start wetting his bed. The child may be very sad and very depressed. These are cries for help which you cannot ignore, because by now it's already gone too far. So you must refer the child to a professional for assessment. Teachers have asked me this question, so what can we do, ma'am, because we have so many children in the class? Well, first of all, sit the child next to you when you're doing corrections. Select 5 or 6 spelling errors and ask the child orally, how do you spell the word? 7 times out of 10, the child will give you the correct spelling, so give her the chance to correct it. In a math sum, the child has to write 13, she writes 31, her whole sum has gone wrong. And when you ask her what she was writing, she'll say it was 13. Try to give marks or judge the child's work more on the oral responses. When you're writing on a board, black or white or anything, use different colored chalks or markers for every line so that he doesn't lose his space, which line he was on. The work may be very untidy, and what we do as teachers, because we have so much other work, we put a pen through it and we say untidy, redo. But please try and look at the content of the child's work. Are the points all there? He can write it later, but give marks at least for the content. Do not ask him or her to read out loud unless they want to. Give extra time if they need it. Most important, encourage what the child can do well: music, games, design, art, etc. What I was actually asked was that how can we work with these children at this time? And really, this is a great time for children with learning difficulties because they need multisensory inputs. If you are doing online education and you are talking, you're giving them the auditory. If you're also showing pictures or maps or graphs, you're giving them the visual. Teach the parents how to give them tactile stimulation. For example, a child has difficulty writing A to Z on a paper. Let them write it in sand or in salt or on the mother's back. Encourage parents to read with their children. Both mother and child read out loud. Play board games. It teaches them how to do sequencing. Do lots of jigsaw puzzles. Kinesthetic input. We have seen that when children do spellings along with the physical activity, so if you're playing catch ball or the child is playing basketball outside or skipping and there's a spelling at the same time, it really seems to help. For older children, parents can take the whole chapter and highlight the important parts and summarize the points for the child. Encourage self-talking. So when a child is reading, don't let him read just in his mind. Let him hear his own voice. And at the end of every paragraph or two, let them vocalize what they have read. Help them with graphic organizers when they need to write essays and long answers. So I don't think I have much more time. So I'm going to end here. You can ask me any questions. And if you have 2 minutes, you can also read this. For all the importance that we give to spelling, I think everybody is going to be able to have read that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of teachers and parents who are here with us today have taken notes. If I can go back to Joy.
Yeah.
Hi. So we just heard about identification of a child's special needs, but this is more from a dyslexia, dyscalculia point of view. Could you take us through your journey with Neil? When did you first realize that there were special needs to cater to?
So Neil it's been a strange history because he's one of twins, and till the age of 2.5, he was completely normal. And he was exactly the same as his brother. And that was the time, just just the point was at 2 and a bit, people have a burst of speech and this thing. So he only had a couple of words and he didn't have more than that. And then the other child, Vivek, kept speaking and Neil just did not have a speech at that point. So then at that point in time, it was still thought that, speech catches up and, you have late speakers and it doesn't matter. He seemed to be fine otherwise. And we admitted him into a play school called Astro Kids. And it's one of those play schools which is actually fairly chilled with the kids. So they allow the kids to roam around. So what finally transpired, I think, was that Neil used to just not understand or whatever there was in class, and he'd just wander around. And what would typically happen is they'd put somebody to just see that he's going in the right places. But in those days, he was still able to. I mean, he was physically fine otherwise. And so we finally, there was, when the time came to put them into proper school, we went to various schools, and obviously everyone wanted to admit Vivek, but Neil obviously wasn't interested. And we were lucky enough to hit a school called Shikshantar. And Shikshantar was a very new school at the time, but there's Mr. Batra, who was the director of education there, wonderful, wonderful man. He said, look, if you have an investment in the child's education, so do we. So he says one of the parents must be there with the child in class in the early years. And that's exactly what we did. So I used to work in ESPN Star at the time. So I would go at 8 o'clock in the morning to there and spend time till 9:30, be there with the child and with Neil. And then my wife would come and I would go off to office, and that's the routine we followed. But so then it's been a long journey. Subsequent to that, he had a very, very strong he had a terrible attack. We still don't know what exactly it is, whether it's a nerve attack, whatever. He was in hospital for 21 days. And when he came out, he had lost all speech. He had, in fact, lost what we call most of his cerebellum, extensive cerebellum damage. So he came out like, he did not, his neck, even as a 5-year-old, his neck wasn't steady. And this was not, he didn't have any physical problems before that. And of course, he was away from school from a year and a half. And then we sort of slowly got him back to class and got him to go there. And the school was wonderful in the sense that I'm not sure what Neil understands or doesn't understand. And I think there are two parts to this. One is that what the child will pick up in a class of peers, age-wise peers. But the other is also what the child gets in terms of socialization, what the child gets in terms of other children around him, feeling that, okay, I'm also a part of all this. And I think those are what the essential skills that Neil learns. So Neil is 19 today, and, after the 10th, obviously there's no way to, have him in the education system proper, and he does go to some special needs places. But for me, the way we look at it, Neil is particularly severely autistic, very, very autistic, not behaviorally autistic as much as there's cerebellum damage. So there is a certain amount of, he is still unable to probably even grasp letters completely. It's a hit and miss matter on letters, which could be for a variety of reasons. It could be for partially eyesight, partially the fact that he's intellectually incapable. So all I want to tell, the 2-3 things that I want to tell parents is that, going through this, you're going to go through, and especially if you're early in this curve, you will have a 4-stage cycle. And the first stage of your cycle is absolute and total disbelief that this isn't happening to me because there are so many kids around. Why is my kid getting it? So your first stage is disbelief. Then you will go through a stage which is anger, saying that why me? God, why me? Why us? Why do we have to do this? And remember, unlike I lost my mother to presenile dementia, Alzheimer's disease, but it's easier to understand. My mother had a full life. It's much more difficult to understand when you have a child because the child has their life ahead of them. So you go through anger. Why me? Why did this happen to us? Why? Why God? Why? So you go through that phase, and it's a necessary phase. Not avoiding it will not help. And then your third phase that you go through is grief. You will cry buckets. You will cry, and try and wonder that, you're going to live with this the whole life. How are you going to cope? And when those stages pass is when you reach the stage where you say that, okay, fine, I've cried enough, I've done enough. Now it's something, try to do something about it. And what that something is will vary from parent to parent. It will vary from the amount of disability your child has or the amount of problems your child has. And those will change from parent to parent. It's not, it's my child was specially had really a lot of difficulties. Other children will be much less severe, and there's a whole spectrum out there. But all I can tell, and there are many people much more qualified than me to talk on the other end of things. My 2-3 things that I will say is, one is, allow yourself as parents, especially if your parents are there, to go through these phases. It's okay to have grief. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. These are very natural things. They happen to every parent. And the more you get used to it, the better it is. The second thing, and I'd say is, this is something I very severely believe in when my child was, first diagnosed, and, I've had the classic situation having one child who's typically what we label as normal and one child who has issues. I was, as a parent, pathetically grateful to anyone who would be nice to my child. I'd be very nice. I would be grateful that, thank you so much for being nice to my child. It was very important to me, and I was grateful. I was, over the top. I didn't expect it when it happened, and, I was very defensive all the time. As the years go by, as a parent, especially as a parent of a child with special needs, one of the things you need to be very clear about is that they have a right to education. They have a right to be what they are. And if they're not neurotypical, they're not neurotypical, but they have as much of a right to this planet as we do. So if your child, makes a bit of noise and people look around and all that, that's fine. That's him, that's her. And they have as much of a right to be like that as you have to cheer when you are happy or to cry when you. It's the way their bodies react. If a child closes his ears and puts his head down, it's because you have absolutely no idea of the kind of sensory overload that child is going through. So learn 2 things, as I said: allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to grieve. These are all part of the process. But most importantly, when your child goes through that journey, learn not to be apologetic. Be nice, be happy when people are nice with them, but if they're not, tell those people that your child has as much rights as any neurotypical kid has. Because standing up for your child and allowing them the fact that they just have a right to be neuroatypical just as we have a right to be neurotypical is extremely important. And as a parent, I can't stress it enough. The last thing I'd leave you with is, it's not necessarily, I'm not, as I said, I'm not a huge believer. I'm much more of a believer in having integrated situations where children at least spend time with other children, not of keeping them separately. But one of the things that does and is very important to children with special needs is that their parents at least meet with other parents of children with special needs and get some sort of they need some solace. Because let me tell you one thing, it's like being to be honest, I work with KKR, it's like being on a team when you're losing all the time. The only friends you'll have is in that, in that hotel room, who are the people who have lost together. And similarly, sometimes when you're a parent of a special needs child, the only friends you seem to have are, friends of other special needs parents, because they go through the same journey. And I'm not saying they're the only friends you need to have, but I think it's important sometimes to say that, we are together in this, and there are other people going through this as well. So make your relationships and bonds in that society. Try, and as I said, go through your grief, go through your anger, and never apologize for your child. They are what they are, and the more you apologize for them, the more defensive they will get. Whether you see it or not, it happens. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joyda. Can't thank you enough for sharing this with us. Ms. Ghosh, if I may come to you, Joy spoke about the integrated environment. You work at the Pathway School with children who have special education needs. Could you talk to us about how you work on integrating these special children with the rest of the class? Ma'am, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You know what? First and foremost, I think it's because there are a lot of people watching this webinar, and they have asked a lot of questions which I've tried to answer about integration. And I think there are a lot of school teachers. So they're asking, like the basics. So I'll just walk them through what is an inclusive education, how is it integrated in a school, and how it works, and the stakeholders. So the most important thing is, like, I mean, I do understand where Joy is coming from, because we've had to deal, I mean, there is a very visible child's need, which I'm very impressed with the children, because it's how the children accept in the environment and the socializing that happens, and that will only happen if the adults role model. A lot of acceptance has to come with adults. So when Philip was showing the screen, sharing the screen, he was talking about how we label children. And in the present day, children are not really mean. I would say they're more insensitive. So I start with a quote which says, every student can learn, just not on the same day or in the same way. And it shouldn't matter how slowly some children learn, as long as we are encouraging them not to stop. And when you talk about integration is just not having a certain percentage, like the CBSE insists that so socioeconomic, and we do get a sheet from the government saying, state the number of children who are learning needs, special needs. And at that point in time, we look at, we have these many dyslexics and these many things. But when we talk about special education needs, it's something that a label that comes along with it is very difficult for both mainstream teacher and a parent to understand. So the biggest challenge for any school system is to explain this. And, many parents are wondering whether they have produced children with flaws. It's not a flaw. Many children who've got a learning disability have very high IQs. The other spectrum of learning differently, as Priyo Lall put it across, is the gifted children, who also have their own share of struggles. Einstein was gifted, but he was dyslexic. So using that example, many of our children who are reading dyslexic are brilliant on the sports field. So someone in the panel, in our guest viewership, has asked a question that, instead of seeing the disability, see the abilities of the child in a classroom or outside of a classroom, and create opportunities for that growth rather than looking at it. And when you direct a parent in that direction, you win half the battle. The second thing is, we do live in a society where academics, the pressures of getting marks are so high that parents push their children, knowing that a child is dyslexic, knowing that a child is ADHD, does have a problem in paying attention, retention. They still say, no, you have to do physics, chemistry. If you don't do science, you will get nowhere. You'll make, so I think we need to start looking at this at a broader perspective, so that schools can really facilitate learning and education in the true sense, rather than just going after marks and pushing a child who's not really enjoying mathematics because he's dyscalculic or she's dyscalculic, and that becomes the only rider for that child's life. School life becomes like, I couldn't do maths, I get thrown out of class, my teacher calls me a duffer, I go to the special ed teacher, but I still don't understand what's going on. Everyone is jealous in my class because I get extra time to do maths. These are the little things that we need to first address before we actually address the child's needs. A child will be helped by a special educator no matter what, but it is the other factors that are so important. So in a school, the school counselor, the senior managers, the education director, and the special ed head works very closely to make sure that school never becomes, oh my God, I had a bad childhood. Because children remember what happens in school. And this is my plea to teachers who are watching this. I have typed a lot of answers which I've left at public and addressed this because I know we're running out of time. And I hope that Shubayu and Achin do a second session, a follow-up session where we're talking about how integration is done. Because in 10 minutes, you can't really explain it. It's a very long process. There are a lot of things that need to be put in place. especially getting the parents to be on board. Parents play a big role. School will tick every box for the child to get a learning and get an academic certification, but it's the journey that the parents have to bear, and they should be ready to know that someone's supporting you in the form of a special educator and an entire school force. So yeah, I close with that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ghosh. You're absolutely right. When we started this and took this on, the responsibility of delivering this particular topic, we did not quite correctly estimate the width which we were dealing with. And I'm sure we will have a follow-up session because clearly there's more unsaid here than is getting said. With that, let me come to Dr. Basur. Uh, Dr. Basur works with the deaf and creates pathways for them to have a living, a vocation, a livelihood in our society. Ma'am, if you could please take us through that journey.
Yeah, good evening. And I have been comprehensively introduced. Thank you for that. Listening to the speakers before me and this discussion over a weekend is definitely quite educative. There is a tagline that, and we really enjoy saying that the deaf hear from their hearts and sing from their souls. And I won't agree more. I'm generally surrounded by 150 deaf children in school, but these days the schools are closed and I'm really missing them. So deafness or hearing impairment is a hidden disability, unlike the other disabilities that you see. If you come to my school, you will see a bunch of happy children gunning to go forward, communicating very freely and very happy. But when a deaf child comes to me in the institution, he's already lost very important few years of his life, that is the foundation years of the child. It is said that, when the child is in the womb, the mother communicates with the child and the child hears that. But my child has not had any incidental learning even after, he's born. And because it is a hidden disability, when the child comes to me in the institution, he's not had the parents, of course, like Mr. Joyce said, are disturbed for over a period of time. So he's lost those very important years of his life. And he's going to be always behind his hearing peers, where the factual knowledge of the world and social adjustment stands. So it becomes really important for a deaf child to come very early to my institution, and early intervention happens. Early intervention as soon as maybe, a few months, 6 months, 8 months, 4 months. In that case, what is going to happen? We can work with the parents and, make them understand how important it is for them to communicate with their deaf child. Now, for a deaf child, like a lot of research has happened for the blind and autism. For the deaf, there are still lots of debates and what is good for a deaf. There's various methods and methodologies that various deaf schools are using. And also for a deaf child, it becomes very important, whether the child is prelingual or postlingual. When I say prelingual and postlingual, it means whether before the child became deaf, did he acquire any language? Or he became deaf before after he's acquired some language. So our methodology of educating the child would vary. It would even vary depending on how much of the disability the child has, whether the child is profound deaf or whether the child has partial hearing. Our methodology of education would also change, understanding whether the child is born in a deaf family or he's the only child who's deaf in the family. So, and 80 to 85%, it is seen, a deaf child is maybe just the only child who's deaf, the others are hearing. And also, these methodologies would vary because there are various ways of teaching the deaf. You would have, most of the schools follow a lip reading kind of teaching to the deaf, which is also known as oral communication. So the child looks at your lip reading and understands what you're saying. That is one methodology and one way of teaching the deaf. The other is the bilingual. the one which we are following. And the third would be total, where word to word translation is taught to the people. But we at our institution, and something which the deaf really want is the bilingual way of teaching them. When I say bilingual, I mean 2 languages. The primary, the mother tongue of the deaf will be the Indian Sign Language. Just just like there's a British Sign Language, there's an American Sign Language, there's an Indian Sign Language too. And the Indian Sign Language is very precise. There is a dictionary of the Indian Sign Language, which is upgraded every year. Words are added. The deaf adults are called to be a part of it, and they add words into it. So following the bilingual way of teaching the child helps the child to develop a broader vocabulary and prepares the child for the world. So, which in short, I'm going to be now calling ISL. Now, ISL becomes, really important. And I was talking about early intervention, and when early intervention happens, the parents are taught ISL so that they start communicating in the first couple of years also of the child. They start communicating with the child. You will generally see where the deaf child has deaf parents or deaf siblings. The child turns out to be smarter, is more aware, because he has been communicated right in the beginning. You all understand the importance of communication. Today we are here and communicating. We develop a bond. Similarly, communication becomes very important. In fact, I am going to take this platform and I know there are parents and there are teachers in this forum. I take this platform, I'm telling people that ISL, the Indian Sign Language, should be taught to everybody. My child, and you see, the panelists have been talking about inclusion. The inclusion of the deaf child can only happen if the teachers or the children in the school understand what the Indian Sign Language is. If some of you have met the deaf children, you will see that the children communicate with their hands. But a lot of them are just doing gestures. The Indian Sign Language that we teach to them is really precise. So, in fact, I was just listening to the news, and Ranbir Singh, the Bollywood star, has made a petition where he says that the Indian Sign Language should be added as the 23rd official language of the country. So I would urge all those who are here that you must also start teaching your children ISL, the Indian Sign Language, just like you teach Sanskrit and French and Chinese in the schools. If you teach your children ISL at an early stages, in the primary sections, you will understand that your child will be able to communicate with my child when the inclusion happens, or the child meets, my child somewhere. They will be able to communicate. They'll be able to communicate among themselves. So, and that is why, they say, generally they say the child is, and when people meet me, they'll say, I am the principal of the deaf and dumb school, so I need to correct them. So no, I'm the principal of a deaf school. My children are very bright and very happy. In fact, my deaf children get offended if I say that if somebody says dumb and deaf, they are just deaf who are not being understood because you're not understanding their language. Somebody came to my school and they we were over a conversation. They said, I don't think your children are disabled. It's we who are disabled because we don't understand their language. So understanding and learning ISL will really help inclusion of my child in the society. Then for my kids, you see where here they will communicate. Now, the deaf children are also visual learners. So when we are educating a deaf child, we need to take proper, consensus of the classroom that the child is sitting in. The deaf literature says you should not have more than 8 to 10 children in a classroom. Make them sit in a semicircle so that, they can see the expressions of a child. Though the teacher is going to be using her hands to, speak to the child, but the expressions of the teacher also become very important. And like some people said, that the other senses of the kids are really developed. Similarly is the case with my kids. You stand in the classroom and they'll observe you like that, and they'll give you a name in 5 minutes before you've left the classroom. So I'll take this opportunity to teach. I think people can watch me on the video. I'm going to just teach you a beautiful word, and that is this. Can you all see me? I think you can. So this is a complete sentence of my child, which means I love you. And I'll tell you how it becomes I love you. This is I, this is L, and this is you. So it becomes I love you. Isn't it beautiful? So, uh, so once you learn sign language, my children will be acceptable even in the society, and they're not going to feel isolated. Now, what happens with the deaf child? A deaf child, once he moves in the society and people don't understand what he's saying, will become very shy, will lose his confidence, and will try and seclude himself from the other activities. And that is what is happening with my adult deaf children. They are losing their confidence in spite, and it's not a very great thing. So also, like some of the speakers said, that the success of the children depends on the parental interaction and the socioeconomic conditions of the parents and how involved. And for me, it is how much the parent learns the Indian Sign Language. Now, what happens? We make it compulsory. If we are teaching the child the Indian Sign Language, we will make it compulsory for a parent to come and learn with us. But over a period of time, as the child grows with me, I'm going to be adding up a lot of technical words for my child, which become very difficult for my parent to, keep up to. And hence, it becomes also important that the Indian Sign Language is taught to the parents on regular basis. So when my child graduates from the school to the higher education, the life becomes even more difficult for the child. Why? Because in our colleges there are no interpreters. So so how does my child understand? And mostly in our country, education is done through speaking and talking. And hence, in the higher education, I would also urge that they should be interpreters who interpret for my kids, and a lot of written work is done on the boards so that the child can understand what is being taught. So and also when this doesn't happen in the higher studies, when they don't get that, there is the dropout rate becomes very high. And this is like a vicious circle. My child doesn't get into higher education, then he doesn't get a good job, he doesn't earn well. So we need to break that and get our education system ready for inclusion. In fact, I have an example of this very a bright boy in my school who was profound deaf, and he came to us and he studied with us till class 7th, and we found him to be very bright, and we thought inclusion could be done with the hearing kids. But the child was very reluctant. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to miss out on his friends. He had inhibitions that the hearing school people are not going to talk to him, and how is he going to communicate? And he cried and he wept. But he had very supportive parents and strong parents who, we naturally, neighboring school, we put him in, and, we kept giving him support. After school hours, he kept coming to us. And gradually, he started liking, and he made some friends. The principal of the school was very kind. She sensitized the kids. She sensitized the teachers. The child reached class 10th, and he topped the class 10th with the hearing peers. And this I'm talking about a profound deaf. So in some of the subjects, painting, he got 100 out of 100. And then when he reached class 12th, he again topped the hearing school. So it's so amazing. A deaf child, a profound deaf child with the support, and he tops class 12th board. And today that boy is proudly studying in Delhi University and doing very well. So it's the support that is required, not just from the organization which was helping the child, but also other schools that are sensitized. So that's what I'm saying. All the other schools and institutions, they also try to teach. In fact, I would propose that we can also give you videos where you can, initial sign languages is the lockdown time. Children are not coming to school. So we could, send you videos of sign language, which you could send. I'm sure all schools are doing online classes. So if you could do that, your children could learn a new language in these few months. So when they come back, they will have a language, and they will enjoy doing that. Like I just told you about this sentence, the whole sentence, I love you. Similarly, there are very interesting aspects of the sign language as you get into it. So I think I'll conclude with that. And can you hear me, Vivek? Are you with me?
Yes, ma'am, we could hear all of that. Shubha, you here? And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Typically, when we come towards the end of the discussion, we ask all of our panelists to summarize a few key takeaways for all of our other participants who have been here, the teachers and parents who join us as participants. Today, instead, let me ask you this question, all three of you, Ms. Ghosh, Ms. Lall, and Dr. Basur. We at Notebook, we are a digital education platform. We teach through videos. When we started out, one of our key motives was to be inclusive, which we said the teaching will have images, the teaching will have subtitling for all videos. So if people can't hear well, they'll be able to read what is being said on the screen. And they will have instructors teaching with enough gestures, enough expressions to get points across. Today, to all three of you, we as a digital education platform or any other online education platform out there, what can we do to be more inclusive towards children with special education needs? Ms. Lal, if you can start with you.
Yeah, Subhayu, I think have more sessions like this, and because we need to explain. I haven't answered any questions, but I'm seeing a lot of teachers have said, how do we tell the parents that this is the problem with the child? And Joy has been through all the stages of denial and grief and anger. A lot of counseling will be needed. We need to empower teachers, like Anamika said and like Puneet said. If we don't empower them to be able to teach, we will not have inclusive or integrated education in this country, because our classrooms are too large. Many children will require special schools, but if you can use, I think the biggest problem right now in India is teachers are not trained sufficiently to include children with any special needs in the classroom. And by saying, how do we, every question I've read says, how do we tell the parents? The parents are not to blame. The parents need our support. What we end up doing is we call the parents in and we say, your child is not trying hard enough. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't keep your child. He can't cope up because of other special needs. So we need to have a huge discussion on each disability in depth. How will you deal with a child who has visual impairment in a mainstream class? Yet we must aim for that. So I think Anamika has something to say.
Yeah, I do. Actually, because being the head of a special education needs department in a school, it is the most difficult thing to explain to parents. See, parents will accept a child with, let's say, polio or with a cerebral palsy because it's something they can visualize. But it's very difficult for a parent or a teacher that the child is perfectly okay. Oh, well, he does this and he does that. He's very naughty in the classroom, or she's always chattering and everything. But how do you explain to a parent that, learn dyslexia? Simple thing as, she's like, ma'am, I'll give you an example and then we'll get it, how parents respond. So I had a parent who came in and said, but she reads a lot of books. And I said, is she doing meaningful reading? The parent turned around and said, what is that? I said, can she, or she imagines. Then I said, from those books, can she spell? But she takes a lot of time. She reads the same book for a very long time. That was what the parent said. I said, because she's got reading dyslexia. And when I said reading dyslexia, the parent was like, what's that? Are you trying to tell me my child is stupid? And when you get that response, you know that now it's going to be very difficult for me to explain what happens. So I use visuals. And sometimes it's easier to sit the child down and say, why don't you read? And then I point out to the parent, did you notice this? Did you notice this? And then they're like, okay. And then the fear that, what log kya kahenge? We live in a society, unfortunately, if a child is in is got a special ed tag, even the teachers sometimes are very dismissive, because in our B.Ed degree, I did the regular B.Ed. So I know for a fact that children with special needs is an optional subject to do. I think special needs education should be part of our curricula when we're training teachers at the entry level. And then it should be mandatory for all schools to have, through the academic year, they do have professional development where they do train teachers classroom management, differentiation, and understanding that if a child is running around your classroom, you have to also look at whether are you teaching correctly? Are you using the correct tool to address the child's learning style? Some of our teachers don't even know the basic learning styles of a child. Like you were talking about kinesthetic learning. And they don't get it, you know, and sometimes we have teachers who are not qualified, who come into the teaching profession. They definitely need to have a rigorous training in special need and in differentiation, and understanding that integration, mainstreaming, and inclusion are three different terms that work simultaneously in any institution. You know, inclusion is, you know, oh, we have these many children with, you know, this problem, that problem in our school. That's a physical number. But what are you doing to address that inclusivity? Are we all sensitive? Are we all empathetic? Are we all pushing the universities, like Puneet said, that colleges need to, in the US, learning needs, if you, parents proudly talk about, oh, my kid's dyslexic and has to stay back on Wednesdays at school to, you know, with the special ed teacher and the life skills teacher and the counselor. So the child's routine is made. That's part of the IEP. And then that teacher writes to the college professor that the child is going to go to, that this is the problem, this is what the child knows you need. And colleges have special educators present, counselors, who work with the kids. We don't have enough teachers who are qualified to teach. So I don't know what's going to happen, Puneet, in colleges, in universities. You know, you're just a roll number among 300 kids. You got in by special quota. If you have a disability certificate, you'll get your qualification in Delhi University, Calgary University. That disability certificate is one of the reasons why parents are willing to, you know, put their children through the psychometric tests. So it's a systemic change that is required for everyone to come on board, for learning to be more fun for all kinds of kids. You know, so that's my take.
I'm talking now for the deaf kids. And I agree with what Joy says that, you know, acceptance comes a little slowly, grief, and, you know. So I have been really working on this acceptance, where he also pointed out that, you know, parents should be brought together. So I really go on that, and I think that, and which I've tried to do also. I've made clubs for my parents, you know. I've called them, identified them. In fact, if I find that there is a mother who gets in a deaf child, so I will, you know, quickly ask her, I'll try and employ her in some of whatever way I can, you know, as if she's qualified to be a teacher, I'll take her in, train her, because I know if I train this, if I train this teacher, because everybody said, you know, trained teachers are not available. So I'll take her in without, you know, even the sign language, and start training her, because I know she's going to be training not only in the school, but she's going to be training at home also with her deaf child. If she's not qualified enough to be a teacher, then I'll call her for anything. We'll tell them, okay, you come knit with them, we'll teach you stitching. So as a result, you know, that it becomes like a club for them, for the mothers to come and sit and enjoy and interact and understand the problems of the child. And these problems in case of deaf child, you know, increase as they grow. This alienation from the parents because of the lack of communication, because my child is going to be learning a lot of technical words as he grows with me, but for a parent to cope up with those you know, extensive sign language is difficult. And then I'm again focusing on the deaf children. Another thing that I've done, I have my deaf adults who went out, and my school ex-students and all, who went out and did their qualification. I got them back as teachers. So they've become like mentors to my kids. They will not maybe listen to me or my teacher, my hearing teachers, but they are their role models. So these are a few things I have done. And of course, when I spoke, I was harping upon how important it is for other children in schools to learn, you know, sign language, so that they can communicate and inclusion can happen. So I would go in for these a few things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basur. In fact, while you were speaking, I had a discussion with Achin. Notebook in case people here don't know, we host videos for students to learn their normal curricular subjects. If you would be kind enough to share any kind of learning videos for Indian Sign Language, we would want to include that on our platform and make that available to every student out there free of charge. So if they're learning science, maths, history, geography using notebook videos, they should have an equal opportunity to learn Indian Sign Language. This is something
Now
that
I'll have to say this. I'll have to say this to you. Thank you so much.
we'll take this offline. We'll surely make that happen.
Yeah, surely, surely. Thank you.
Ms. Lall, if I may come on to the other side of things, you touched upon this briefly when you started speaking in your opening remarks. You said that becoming a special education instructor or a teacher
Yes.
is not a lucrative career option.
Yes.
However, if there's one thing that has become amply clear over this last hour and a half,
Yeah.
has been the immensely important role that you play and
Mm.
how every school should perhaps have extremely qualified people because of the sustained impact that you would have on so many lives.
Right.
Would you care to comment on that? How that needs to change, or would you see that? Have you seen that change over the last so many years that you've been working?
I have not. I don't see many people coming into the field. I've been working 30 years. I think I agree. Anamika also said that getting special educators, getting trained teachers. So we thought, look at it the other way around. Now, in our country, all special educators, as you may know, need to be registered with the Rehabilitation Council of India. The Rehabilitation Council of India offers courses, B.Ed, special education in intellectual disability, in hearing impairment, in the autistic spectrum. I think people don't know about it. I think there's not enough publicity about these courses because if somebody is already a B.Ed, a general education teacher, they can do a very short distance learning program. It's called the postgraduate program. So they can just add that degree and then they can become trained to be a special educator. I think it's more important for general school teachers to be trained in special education than people to become only special educators, because the special educator will be trained in one specific special need. Now we've taken this up with the RCA, the Rehab Council of India, that why don't you have a generalized course where all disabilities are taught? And the problem is huge. You know, I don't think the people who are listening to this, there are people, because of, again, I live in Uttarakhand, in the remote areas of our states, there are so many special needs children going to government primary, government schools where they get absolutely no help. And we work with a lot of village kids. So teachers, general education teachers need to be trained. But because it is mandatory to have the recognition, I think we should be in touch with RCI, the Rehab Council, to see what we can do about teachers who want to get a special education degree added to their general degree.
Priyo, there is an issue with the RCI. To keep your registration number, you have to attend so many courses.
Every 5 years we have to upgrade our.
Yeah, but you need to get those 200 credits, which is another problem
100,
for
100.
100 and
100 over 5 years.
But the thing is that not every course is got that many credit points and you have to complete it over 5 years. What happens to, I have a teacher who's RCI registered, right?
Yeah.
But because she's working, many of the courses are outside where they're getting the CREs, not within, let's say, Gurugram.
I'm going to interrupt Anamika, that if the school thinks it's important enough for the teacher to have her training, I think the teacher needs to give. There are 3-day programs. There are 3 days and 5 days. I run 2 programs a year, every year, and they're 3 days and 5 days. Puneet knows about that.
I have been also, yes.
And they get 6 and over 5 years. I mean, I've done it because of my age. I don't need to do it anymore. But in over 5 years, it's not difficult. And to send a teacher out to attend this, there's so much exposure. I think it's important, man. I don't know how much time we have
to upload a lot more. You know, they need to revamp the whole.
Yeah.
We need to push them, I guess.
We need to push them. Yeah, right. You.
To all of you, thank you so much. I think that's all that we'll have time for today.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Yeah.
Before we close, one quick point that I wanted to kind of introduce all of you to. We were going to make this a big splash and announce something coming up, but now I see a deeper reason for this to exist. with the success of the Together for Education webinars, we have now introduced a new event which is for the students. A lot of people were looking at the speakers who have been coming on these Together for Education webinars and talking about how can students get more exposure in public speaking, how can they become better speakers. So we said, because schools are also missing out on the school fests, why not have a large online school fest thanks to the technology that we have on offer. So we are now announcing the 0 Hour, which is an inter-school debate competition that we are going to do across 64 schools to begin with, and then scale up going forward. What I would want to do is also to introduce a separate set of rounds for students with special education needs. And we would be in touch with you individually so that we can structure that better. For example, Dr. Basur, we could have a set of interpreters for students who are deaf to be able to debate on this forum. We would
Definitely.
really want it to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
But to all the teachers and principals out here, 0 Hour will be announced and communicated to your schools very, very soon. We are looking at making it India's largest public speaking event for school students, so that students also have the exposure to other schools, other students, and get more well-versed in public speaking. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for me to call upon Achin for his vote of thanks. It's been a phenomenal discussion. Thank you all so much. And I'm sure we'll have to come back with a part 2 of this discussion if you have to do any kind of justice to this topic. Achin, over to you.
Yeah, Shubhayu. I guess we had a very informative discussion, and as all the speakers rightly pointed out, we do need a follow-up session on this very soon. But it's a very relevant perspective from a senior educator, and I'm sure a lot of takeaways for the audience. Ms. Priyo, Lall, we all learned a lot today. Very informative presentation.
Thank you.
I'm sure it will help a lot of educators and parents who are present here. Mr. Joy Bhattacharjya, thank you so much for sharing your journey as a parent. It will help a lot of people. Very nicely put, very aptly put. Disbelief, anger, grief, and then dealing with it. And allowing yourself as a parent to go through all these phases. And I completely agree with you. You've summed it up very well, that they have a right to this planet as each one of us. So I see absolutely no point in being apologetic. So I think thank you for your heartfelt perspective. Dr. Basur, really liked your deliberation, and you started off on a very beautiful note, that deaf hear from their heart and sing from their soul. And you rightly mentioned early intervention is very important. Also, I'm sure what you said about teaching methodologies, Indian Sign Language, very important, teaching to parents. In fact, this will help a lot of esteemed educators who are here with us today. And I think in this forum, we all agree that understanding of ISL is important for each one of us. Ms. Anamika, Ghose, again, very informative presentation. We indeed look forward to more detailed session on this. And I think you very rightly pointed out that at times it's difficult for parents to access something that they can't visualize. Societal fear, denial, being dismissive doesn't help. Thus, training teachers for teaching specially able child should be mandatory, and then definitely they should also get an opportunity for continuous professional development. I think you rightly pointed out that a systemic change is required, but that will come only when our attitude as a civil society change, which I guess is most important. I think that is all we have for today. And I really thank the audience for being with us here today. Your support, your encouragement has helped us conduct this Together for Education webinars twice every week. And we look forward to having you with us here again on coming Wednesday, 5 p.m. Thank you. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.